USA. Haile served congregations in Colorado and in New York State and continues to preach, teach, and write and serve on church-wide committees in the Presbyterian Church and beyond. And she's also been involved with the New York State Poor People's Campaign, both in the North Country and on Long Island. And finally, we also have with us the Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, who is Executive Director of the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice, and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. She is an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church USA and teaches at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. She's the editor of We Cry Justice, Reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign, and the author of Always With Us, What Jesus Really Said About the Poor. And she's been organizing among poor and low-income communities for 30 years with organizations like the National Union of the Homeless, the National Welfare Rights Union, Coalition of Immokalee Workers, and many more. So this is a great panel that we have here tonight. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Zweig.
Well, good evening, everybody. Let me start my timer here so that I know when 12 minutes is up. So let me just start by saying that the Christian right is a political movement. It's not just an interpretation of our religious doctrine. And what I want to talk about is those relationships and the political content of this, and leave to Reverend Liz and Haile to talk about some of the religious aspects of the question. So the interpretation, the particular interpretation that Christian nationalism gives to Christianity is an interpretation that serves the interests of the ruling class. It serves the interests of capitalist power. It serves the interests of those in power who are seeking to suppress the rights of workers and women and the poor throughout society. That's what is the political content of this and the import for us in this political moment as we address the Trump victory and his political base. So the first thing I think is important just to establish is that we live in a class-conflicted society. There are classes in the society. There is a ruling class, a capitalist class. There is a working class. The working class is actually the majority of the population. And it's not just white. It's actually not even a majority of white men. The working class in this country is multiracial. It's multigendered. It's 62% of the population. It's the majority. This is something that I think we really need to keep uppermost in our mind and understand that poverty is something that happens to the working class. Poverty is not something that happens to some marginal other that's low in the society and is forever there. So with that, I want to say that this class dynamics percolate through every aspect of society. It percolates through politics, education, culture, media, and of course also through religion, and in every aspect with implications for race and gender dynamics as well. So from the beginning, if we look back in the 19th century and even before, Christian doctrine has been divided over all kinds of questions of class and race and gender. There were Christian defenses of slavery, and there were Christian interpretations of the gospel that were staunchly in the camp of the abolitionists, all claiming Christian authority. In modern times, the Christian nationalism that we're familiar with is the nationalism and Christian movements that emerged in the late 1970s in alliance, at that time, a new alliance with the Republican Party. And I want to spend a moment talking about that because some of the names who were in the Christian right and the evangelical and fundamentalist Christian movements at the time are names that are perhaps familiar to people here: Jerry Falwell, Ralph Reed, James Dobson, and others who were champions of this religious right as it came together in the 1970s. But it's interesting and important also to know that the bridge into the Republican Party came from Paul Weyrich. who was active in the Republican Party in Colorado in the 1960s. He was a very central figure in Republican politics in Colorado and had national standing. And in Colorado, he developed very close ties to the ultra right-wing, ultra wealthy Adolf Coors. You remember, of Coors public, the Coors beer and the boycott Coors. Some of you may remember going back to those days. Well, Paul Weyrich was the bridge that brought the religious right into the Republican Party and the Republican Party into the religious right. Now, that happened in the later part of the 1970s, but I'll just point out that Weyrich was one of the founders of the Heritage Foundation, which we now see as the author of Project 2025. And there's a straight line out of those early days of reactionary politics and religious fundamentalism joined with it into our politics today. And I'll also just point out that all of that comes out of the Powell Memorandum, Lewis Powell in 1991, writing, 1971, I'm sorry, writing for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who urged the corporate elite of this country to come together as a class, not just for their own industry, but to mobilize for the whole corporate system, which at that time was under great attack in every aspect of society. It's hard to imagine that now, hard to remember it even for those of us who lived there. But this project is that we're involved with now is the culmination of something that began over 50 years ago and is a concerted, deliberate effort to link the religious right and the religious doctrines that can be interpreted to support corporate power. And I just also think it's really important to understand that people like James Dobson and Jerry Falwell arose not in the anti-abortion movement. They arose before that in the movement to challenge Brown versus Board of Education and the integration of public schools. You may remember that in that fight, Christian schools were founded, private Christian academies that took white students who were from racist families. Not that these kids themselves were necessarily racist, but that's the way they were being brought up by their parents, and with this connection of this Christian nationalism with very deep racist roots. And that precedes Roe. And of course, though the anti-abortion and the racial divisions and all these other things came into dominance as the so-called culture wars, but those cultural wars became like a cover to draw people into a corporate agenda that they wouldn't otherwise be satisfied with. So I think we need to understand that that is what we're dealing with. It's kind of interesting that this religious right emerged as a political force when Jimmy Carter was president. Now, Jimmy Carter was an evangelical Christian, but he was an evangelical Christian who was not a racist. He was an evangelical Christian who supported abortion rights. But that wasn't good enough for the evangelical Christians who wanted to promote right-wing politics and racist and male chauvinist politics. And so there again, we have this battle going on within the religious community as to who is its political representative and who represents the teachings of Jesus Christ. Now, I think that it's also important to understand that this religious nationalism is not something that is limited to the United States, and it's not something that is limited only to Christians. We see this kind of nationalism going on among the Jewish people in Israel. We see it among the Hindus in India and Modi. We see it even in the Buddhist communities in Myanmar, challenging and threatening and pushing out and killing the Rohingya. In Myanmar, we see it in Islamic societies and Muslim rule in Afghanistan under the Taliban, and in what's going on with women's rights in Iran. what we see in all of those cases is that the religious reactionary politics links with reactionary suppression of worker rights, suppression of women's rights, suppression of minority people's rights. It's a terrible situation that links these two things and makes it very important for us to carry on the fight that we're carrying on. Of course, in the US, it's mutually beneficial because the church, the religious right gets public support for its schools and for its policies, and the corporate elite gets votes in the election. So there's a mutual benefit there that they seem to be willing to strike. Now, I'll just finish by pointing out that Christian doctrine traditionally has always emerged in every religious and cultural doctrine in the context of class division. If you look at Catholic social teaching, for example, the first time that Catholic Church teaching supported worker rights was in the encyclical from Leo XIII called Rerum Novarum in 1891, which promoted the rights of workers. Now, that was the church's response to the upsurge of socialist and communist politics among the working class that found a root there and found real resonance in the working class. And the church wanted to challenge those atheistic views by linking up finally with some aspect of worker rights. So I would say now it's up to us to create the kind of social movement that can move the church as an institution into progressive politics once again. And that's our task, and that's what the Poor People's Campaign is trying to do. And I believe what Reverend Liz and Reverend Barbara are trying to do, and I very much to be part of this movement, even though I am not a Christian, but find common cause around the basic values and core beliefs of racial and working class justice. And I believe that takes my time, and I'm happy to yield to Reverend Haile. Haile Thompson, I think you're up.
Heaven, thank you, Michael. Miquantash yean kuskoye, rememberest thou me as unto our sacred hills. Masaki Munsumana, Wiquanana Susnipi, our land is truly blessed by the great God of nature. I come to you this evening from the Akwesasne territory of the Mohawk of the Haudenosaunee. I'm in an island in the St. Lawrence River on the Ontario portion, at least it's called Ontario right now. And last week from my Shinnecock Reservation, Eastern Long Island, New York. And I begin with a problem with the whole idea of Christian nationalism as a phrase or as a thing. Nationalism makes you say, what nation? Well, that's a varied answer from an indigenous point of view. And Christian, what brand of Christianity? Again, a very diverse bit of diverse answers you would get if you asked Native people about Christianity, because it has been a very violent tool used against our people, our Shinnecock people in 1640 had the misfortune, I suppose, of being the place where English washed up on shore 20 years after they had already been to Plymouth and Cape Cod. And these English came to Shinnecock territory, and they were hiding from the Dutch. Now, if I'm going to guess, I would say both Dutch and English in 1600s would consider themselves Christian. And the actors in this 1640s scene would be the Shinnecock people who hadn't any idea of Christianity in 1640, because we were still praying and living in our language and our culture, the language that I began this introduction using, because it has been outlawed and we have not been allowed to pray and speak in our language for these many, many centuries. But in 1640, those who came had their own way of using, believing, I'll go ahead and say believing, but I think that there's more than just belief in the idea of the creator of the universe is exactly what I want them to be at any given time. So I don't know if that's faith in the spirit world or if it's faith in the people who are telling you what to do and giving you the firepower to do it. I say that Christian nationalism is in the name of Christianity, yes, but we have seen 384 years of things done in the name of Christianity, and very few of them resemble the Christ whose name they have taken. In the 1600s, when Noah welcomed these English people, he had to hide them from the Dutch because the Dutch were hunting the English people. So that's Christian against Christian, I guess. And so those of us who would have been subhuman and heathen savages welcomed people in need and hid them and fed them and gave them a place where they are still living, shall we say. And no good deeds go unpunished, especially in any form of Christianity, whether the ones that we have seen anyway, because under the doctrine of discovery, and we know that those were papal bulls, those were edicts from the Pope in the 1400s and in the 1500s that say that, and if the Pope is supposed to be God's representative on earth and infallible, then this is supposed to be true. And so the faith is not only in the idea of a spirit or God, but this faith is also in this Pope dude who is saying these things to those who explored, those who left their land to find other lands, those who were the kings of the European countries that sponsored these explorers to go around the earth and go where they will and do whatever they will to the inhabitants, because doctrine of discovery says that they had the divine right to take people and land and claim them as their own. We know that that is the basis for all of the violence and generational trauma that we see in this modern world having to do with the continent of Africa. We know that that is having to do with the trauma and the generational violence having to do also with what we call Turtle Island or the Americas. And in the New England area and those first English who came to us, under their belief that this was their predestination and this becoming their manifest destiny, doctrine of discovery makes that the right way to go forward. And so the English would have a 5-step process, at least in the New England area, that again, in the arrogance that you think God is doing whatever you want God to do, but in their arrogance, they write down the formula that they will use by which they will take whatever it is or whoever it is they want to take. And the 5 steps include creating a puppet sachem, confusing and seducing Native people with alcohol, intimidate by armed force, have the Indians under pressure of the private sector, and 5, force the native people into debt so that you take their land as payment for that contrived debt. Under the banner of piracy, we can see where all those things might come into play. Under the banner of Christianity, we hopefully, no matter what spiritual path we follow, if we follow one at all, but we would wonder, how does that come under human beings living on Mother Earth in peace together, where there is plenty to go around and sustain us, and yet there are these certain banners and certain permissions and certain practices that make it impossible for everyone to have equal protections or equal provisions or even be seen as human beings. Language and spiritual ways and holy places and holy spaces denied our native people, oddly, by those who call themselves Christian. So it's even hard to call that Christianity when we see that it is a formula for power and trade and capitalist practices. And in my reading of these scriptures, which I studied, the ones that they force down people's throats, I do not find that that is what Jesus of Nazareth taught. And of course, he is the one who this is supposed to be based upon. So I hear my phone. I wonder if that's my 2 minutes. I want to say, is that my 2 minutes, Susan? It's easier if you just say it because I can't. Yep, time's up.
It's time up.
Okay. I thank you all. I wish you peace and health, and I appreciate your being here for this important conversation. Tabane.
Thank you so much for that, Holly. Really appreciate you and looking forward to hearing more. It's really good to be with folks this evening. And I was thinking a little bit about this question, like, is this a Christian nation, right? And thinking about it, I was reminded of the words of Beulah Sanders. She was a leader of the National Welfare Rights Organization. And in 1972, she spoke to the National Council of Churches, trying to kind of implore them, and like all the Christian leaders at the time, to leverage their institutional power in support of organizing the poor and support of the welfare rights movement. And she has this like brilliant quote. She says, "We expect the churches to spread the truth about the problems in this country. We expect the churches and their members to oppose legislation that oppresses poor people. If we fail in our struggle, Christianity will have failed." And I love this kind of move, this theological intervention that Beulah Sanders makes here. She like reminds us that a Christianity that doesn't stand up for the rights of the poor or the sick or the widow or the immigrant can't claim to be Christianity at all. She kind of challenges the church and at the same time reminds the nation that these divisions of Democrat and Republican or liberal and conservative are just symptoms of this deeper division between the powers and principalities, as we hear in the Bible, and the oppressed and dispossessed. She kind of makes this moral call that I think we have to hear and we have to make today that our nation has to reject the politics of austerity and division and instead embrace the slogan that we say in the Poor People's Campaign of when we lift from the bottom, everybody rises. So I know folk here are familiar with like lots of the facts and figures that we put out, right? Here, in the U.S. Census Bureau, in the kind of report from this past year, 2023, that they just put out in 2024, we have more than 41% of the country, basically poor or low income, or almost 140 million people. And so in a country that has the wherewithal to end poverty tomorrow, and yet has poverty as a leading cause of death, we have to ask this question, I think, is the nation truly a Christian nation when there are 2,000 passages of the Bible that talk about justice for the poor, talking about kind of poverty and the idolatry of wealth and power as like the main thing? I think we kind of turn that question on its head, is like, are we really being Christian? Ending poverty is the priority of Jesus. The kind of good news that anyone that claims to follow Jesus and that Christians are supposed to be spreading, evangelism, evangelion, gospel, it's not the bad news of eviction and abortion bans and attacks on trans kids and mass deportation. Somehow, and it's not really somehow, right? I mean, Michael Zweig just described very much this political movement that has made it so, but these religious extremists have helped to make an equal sign between extremism and regression and racial and religious nationalism and what it is to understand Christianity to be. I think another way to put it is that if these white Christian nationalists have their way, they are pretty far in terms of trying to mold the nation into their image and very much away from the Imago Dei, right? So I want to think for a minute about what I would call the kind of 7 key beliefs that animate kind of modern day Christian extremism in the US. And I want us to think a little bit about how unchristian they are, and yet how much they're animating themselves in our lives today. The first is this kind of idea that a highly exclusionary form of Christianity is the only true religion. And I think one of the biggest things to say in relation to this in a US context is that Christianity in Jesus's time is an interreligious movement, and it's not even called Christianity. And so this notion of one true religion, it is not a Christian concept, and we should actually challenge that very idea, at its premise. And yet we see all kinds of things, like whether Arkansas this week, I'm sure people are aware of this, have said that now in public schools, the Bible is one of the texts that people are going to be studying. I mean, and just imagine the impact. But also think of it as a very unchristian thing to do. So the next, the country should be ruled by this kind of highly exclusionary Christianity, therefore kind of saying that the separation of church and state is anti-Christian and has to be undermined. Now, again, we're hearing already, and we know the limits of kind of the quote unquote founding of the United States. And yet the reason that there is this idea of separation of church and state is to both protect the people and to protect the religion, like to let Christianity be prophetic and to let folks have a freedom to worship whoever they are called to worship, or to not engage in religion at all. And so I just think it's really important for us to realize how anti, quote unquote, American and anti-Christian this idea of undermining the separation of church and state is. The third is that white supremacy, as well as patriarchy and like heteronormativity, are somehow a natural order of the world, and they must be upheld kind of both in our personal lives and in public. And, you know, we could really dive deep into this one. And really see what the Bible has to say about like against all of these ideas, whether it's neither Jew nor Greek, neither male nor female, whether it's the kind of non-binary and very expansive understanding of gender in the Bible, whether it's the fact that abortions are happening at the whole time that Jesus is walking the earth and he never says a thing about it. Therefore, it can't be. And who legislates who gets to marry whom, or what happens with people's, around race, around gender, like, is the empire, and that the whole movement led by Jesus and the kind of kingdom movement or the reign of God movement is all about toppling these binaries and these hierarchies. And so again, the way that it plays out in our society, like it couldn't make it less Christian, quote unquote. Then there's militarism and violence rather than democratic expression and diplomacy are kind of the way to exert power, both domestically and internationally. And there's lots of things to say about Jesus, but definitely blessed are the peacemakers, and kind of nonviolent resistance. And then kind of connected to that, there's this idea that kind of in Christian nationalism, that scarcity is the economic reality of life, and that we, whether it's Americans versus the world, or Christians versus non-Christians, or white people versus people of color, or natural-born citizens versus immigrants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, have to kind of compete when, Jesus says, I have come so that you may have life and you may have it to the full, right? And this notion of scarcity, even in a society that didn't have the productive capacity of ours. And so again, I just think we have to kind of actually deconstruct all of these ideas. Just a couple more. Another key kind of belief is that people who are themselves being oppressed by systemic violence are blamed for the kind of deep social and economic problems in the world. So it's, poor folk are at fault for our poverty. LGBTQ folks are responsible for kind of social rupture. Documented and undocumented immigrants are, rapists and murderers and stealing so-called American jobs. I mean, we know all the horror of it. But again, if we kind of go back to the Beatitudes, or if we go back to any of the kind of key ideas of what is contained in Christianity, it couldn't be more different. And then, like, how this is all held together is, through kind of the Bible being this source of moral authority on these and kind of all issues. And again, like what I'm trying to put out here is for us to like imagine and understand better how what the Bible is really saying about kind of extremism and racial and religious nationalism and the poor. It is again we could liken Trump and his cronies more, I would say, to the Roman emperors. Someone like Nero, who is called the Antichrist. And he's the one that has lavish blankets. He's the one that's kind of using and abusing people's bodies, especially women and boys' bodies. He's the one who's, bankrupting the whole society. He's the one that's responsible kind of for the fall of Rome, right? And instead you have this beautiful fusion, mixed multitude movement of folk across all these divides who inspired by prophetic leaders throughout the ages, who kind of come together and say, everybody in, nobody out. When we lift from the bottom, everybody indeed rises. And so I think it's important for us to kind of look at what some of these ideas are and to see how non-Christian of ideas they are, and go from there then, in terms of then how are we supposed to order our steps, and what are we supposed to be doing in this moment. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Reverend Liz and Michael and Reverend Holly. Really, really appreciate those perspectives. And we want to take some time now to take some questions. And so would invite you to use the raise hand feature if you would like to get in here. You can see there's you'll find it in the button that says react. You can also feel free to put a question in the chat if you would like. And we do want to try to make space for folks to have time to ask their questions. So we ask that you would please keep it brief. I may jump in and interrupt you if I need to. Don't take it personally, fair warning. But I see we have some folks. So Susan, go ahead.
Okay, very quickly. I think an important point that Michael made was it's not just Christian nationalism. It's a method that governments use to inflict their power on the people that have the least power in society. And he mentioned, like, every religion, every single one has its nationalist right wing. That's and I think that it's, if we look at it across the board, it's a technique that usurpers use to crush the people. And the other thing, just one quick thing I wanted to say, I think that one of the worst things that was done by the first people that came to this continent was the stealing of the children and putting them in boarding schools and taking their culture and taking their language. And that was another way that they used to destroy a people, because what is worse than stealing people's children?
Absolutely. Thank you, Susan. Dick, do you want to go ahead?
So my name is Richard Kubek. I coordinate, I'm community outreach coordinator for Long Island Jobs with Justice. So I do faith-based organizing. I'd say about a year and a half ago, Linda Greenhouse had a devastating critique of Christian nationalism in the New York Review of Books. And she said, one of the terrible things they're trying to do is impose Christian values on society. And I thought, oh my God, I must be one of them, because I do that. I want to welcome immigrants. I want to lift up the poor. I want to work for peace. So in the context of power and separation of church and state, what differentiates me from them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Do any of our panelists want to respond to that, and or also to Susan's comment? Go ahead, Holly.
I'll be very brief because it's not long thought out. This is a reaction, so please bear with me. But I think that Christian values are usurped from other cultures. They may go under the sheep's clothing of Christian values, but that there's a lot of wolf underneath that. Secondly, as I said, when the whites came to us, they were hunting each other, and it was the natives who showed so-called hospitality. We never believed that it was right to take a life. So if these people came to us and they were hungry, some of what is here must be for them because they're here and they have to eat. So I think that's a whole thing, and weaponizing anything. We can tell the difference between what is a welcome and what is being forced. And yes, the residential school, yes, and that was way in the 1800s. So since our wrestling match had been in the 1600s, that's late in history of the residential and boarding schools, and that is a terrible trauma that keeps affecting our generations. So thank you for mentioning that as well.
Yeah, thanks. Michael.
Just to address Dick's question, I think the problem comes when you or Paul Weyrich presents your views as Christian views. The whole point is that I think that there isn't one settled understanding of what Christian views are, or Jewish values, or Islamic teachings. I think that what we need to do in all of our communities is to try to find ways of expressing our, if you want, policy prescriptions or our understanding of what's right and what's wrong in terms that are common to everyone and unique to no one. As soon as you start expressing the reason why you're doing this is because that's what Jesus said, that leaves an awful lot of people out who don't know or care what Jesus said. It's not their question. It's not their people. It's not their point of reference. And so I think our point of reference in entering the secular political world, which is really your question, how do we do that? I think we do that not in terms of Christian, explicitly in terms of this is what Jesus says, or explicitly this is what whatever says. As we enter into political life, we do it in terms that are common to all and unique to none. Now, within the church, among Christians, you can have a debate as to what does Jesus say or what does Jesus mean. That's your debate. Go do it. Among the Jewish people, there's that debate goes on all the time. Religiously, it goes on. But when we enter into the public sphere, we don't say Jewish tradition says this or that. We say this is how we think the world should change in terms that everybody can understand. And I think that way of thinking about it, I think, would help to resolve the contradiction that you face in your bringing your understanding of Christian values into the political sphere.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. William, go ahead.
I think one of the ways of resolving the thing is, we talk about, Christian values. Christ didn't identify, well, he identified with service, but he mostly identified with those who need. He identified with the poor and the lost, the least, the last, whoever was the outcast, he identified with. So those are those values that we're talking about is not coming in from the point of view of who feeds. It's who needs and draws humanity out of others. That's the I think that's when I think of Christ, I think in terms of all the immigrants coming who are seeking seeking a home, seeking security, and drawing humanity out of them, Christ didn't start a religion. He was drawing people to recognize the needy among them, and and service to him is service of those in need. I don't know whether I'm clear on that, but I think that the fear and all these negative things that have been done in the name of Christ are they're diametrically opposed. And we got to acknowledge that. The church has to acknowledge it. And I know, in many ways, the church has, at least some leadership. While there are others who are seeking to continue the mistake rather than identify with the solution. Enough.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Iris, I see your hand up.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So I wanted to say, first of all, the name of this wonderful seminar is Christianity, or the United States, a Christian nation. And when I read the title, I thought, no, it's not. It's hopefully, it's a nation where we work together because we want to make this a better world. And we don't have to talk about Jesus, and we don't have to talk about being Jewish, which I happen to be. One of our major precepts is Tikkun Olam. But truthfully, I'm not chairperson of the Social Action Committee of Temple Isaiah, because I'm always thinking of this major precept in Judaism, Tikkun Olam. I'm chairperson because I'm thinking that we need to alleviate hunger. We need to protect our refugees. We need to just make this a better country, a better world. And I don't think we should be talking about Jesus. I don't think we should be talking about Judaism or Christianity. All right. It's not a Jewish nation. It's not a Christian nation. We're working to make it a good nation. Okay. And I'm somewhat resentful when my dear friends who are Catholic and Protestant and so on, and they talk about, well, we have these very good Christian values. And I want to say, no, it's not just Christian. It's you have good values. All right. It's not just Christian values. Years ago, I had a friend who said, I have to get childcare, and I just found somebody who's really, really great. I know I can trust my kids with this childcare because she has such good Christian values. And I said to her, do you mean that Nancy is just a really good person with wonderful values, and that's why you want to leave your kids there? Let's stop talking about Christian, Jewish, and so on. Let's join together and talk about the commonality of just doing what we know is good and just and fair for all people. And it has nothing to do with our religion. It has to do with humanity.
Thank you, Iris. Yeah, I think this, oh, sorry, I'm seeing in the chat. No, I didn't. I'm seeing that somebody else is raising their hand. Joan.
Joan Mistretta is holding her hand up.
Great. Are you able to
Go
unmute
ahead.
yourself, Joan?
Joan, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, sorry.
There we go. Yes, thank you.
Talking about across all religions or in all religions or outside of, not naming these values down to one religion. It's been said so often that it's kind of a cliche, and sounds oversimplified, but the value that's in just about every religion that you can think of is the golden rule. I mean, that's just like universal in everything. And it's when I said oversimplified, it's one of those things that's simple but not easy necessarily. And I think that's a place where we can start talking about things that are common to all of us. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Joan. I think one of the things that's coming out, right, is it gets at the question that you were raising, Dick, and others have brought up about this this question of the pluralism of the United States, and also the recognition of the powerful role that religion plays in a number of different ways. So I have a question to pose to our panelists about, as we're especially entering into this new federal administration and Christian nationalism taking on some new and increased roles, what kinds of interventions are needed from Christians specifically, and from those who don't identify as Christian, that can undermine the ability of the segment of the ruling class to co-opt and claim Christianity? Because we certainly see that is Christianity is having a powerful role in the public sphere. So yeah, I wonder what you all might say about what is the role for those who are Christians, and is there a role for those who aren't, to specifically respond to that, the way that Christianity is being used.
I'll respond, Wes, just briefly by saying it is an important job of clergy to be very clear that our way is one way and there are many ways. And I think that on a Sunday morning or a Saturday evening, or whenever someone is gathering, that language of there are many paths to walk in this world, and to do so without feeling as if all of eternity is on your shoulders. That's another arrogant thought. But to say there are many roads, my people, in spite of the Christianity that chokes us, walk a good red road of life. And saying it all the time is warranted these days. And I just want to throw one more thing in here, and this is just for people to put in the back of their mind. But I quote John Dominic Crossan when he talks about fundamentalism of any religion. Within fundamentalism, there is the genocidal germ. And that genocidal germ has to do with thinking that you alone or your group alone has the only truth. And it emboldens people to think that if I have the only truth, and if I ever come into power, I may do something about all those folks who don't have the truth or who refuse my truth. So we do have to be very verbal, very vocal, very intentional about saying there are many paths to walk in this world, and we must have mutual respect.
Reverend Liz or Mike, do you have anything you want to add here?
Well, I spoke a minute ago. I do have some things, but I'd defer to Reverend Liz.
Yeah, so I have a number of thoughts. I mean, I appreciate the kind of complexity of this, right? Like, on the one hand, I think it's actually important for us. I think you're asking us to do this, West, to consider the power and influence of religious extremists, but especially Christian extremists, who are leading this political movement in this country, like was described by Michael in terms of that really important history. And I think in response to that, I think there's at least two things we have to do. One is, I think we cannot afford to concede kind of religious, geographic, like, and the kind of list goes on, like, space. So I think that, in this election, for instance, like, we can't be talking about red states and blue states. We have to be talking about, unorganized places, and all places. And I think when it comes to the question of religion, especially Christianity, Christians can't concede Christianity to extremism. That is in no way the full amount of work that has to happen. But I think what we have seen in the kind of conceding of Christianity, and not having Christians and other people of faith speak very strongly about that this is not in our name. I think it has left a gap that has been filled very fully by these political actors that Michael was talking about. And I don't call them religious actors because I don't think that's actually what's motivating. But I think also when you don't hear anything else. Now, it is really important that isn't the only thing that has to happen. Because I think what has to happen even more than that is we have to organize like holistically, which means we need like our grassroots organizations and our houses of worship and our labor unions and like all the different institutions in our society like have to be meeting people's spiritual and emotional and material needs. And that has not been happening, at least to the level it needs to be. And I think that two of the things we have to do is not concede like any forms of religion to extremism, but it's not just like a he said, she said, or like I'm going to say this and you're going to say that. It's not just like debating it out that way. It's like knowing from like what I heard Iris talking about of like you meet the needs, you welcome the strangers, you do the things because that's what a good person does. And that's the kind of society we're trying to build and live in. And I think we have a lot to learn in terms of how we actually do that. And again, when I look at some of these Christian extremists who are the first people to show up in the case of extreme weather events and are the folks that are taking over many of the housing programs in our society. And they're the folks that are figuring out how to kind of meet people's spiritual and emotional and material needs. I think we have to notice that. And we don't do it just because folks are doing it. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And we can indeed live in a society that has goodness and truth and love throughout. And that isn't because our faiths tell us so. It's because like it's something that unites us.
So let me get into this, and then Wes, you can recognize, continue on here. But just to answer your basic question, Wes, what do we do now? I think we build the biggest, strongest, most vibrant and widespread movement of resistance that we can muster. And that is not a religious task. That's a human task. It's a political task for all of us. Workers and women and everybody is going to be rising up in anger and in frustration and in pain to confront this administration and what it plans to do. And our task, all of us, is to build that movement as strong and as powerful and as righteous as it can be. Now, that is the context in which the religious debate that Liz was just talking about takes place. Otherwise, it's just an abstract debate. But when you are involved in the actual struggle of which side are you on, and it's the which side are you on in the actual struggle between labor and capital, that is actually what we are involved in. That's the context in which, from all of our perspectives, we enter into this struggle. And I have to say that it's not just in the religious communities, it's also in the secular communities. It's also among, Marxists and atheists and all kinds of other people who are trying to figure out what to do and have very different views, sometimes views that are, appropriate to the interests of capital and sometimes to the interests of workers. So that's something that we all have to sort out. But I'll just ground it again, that to make it concrete and to give it actual life and give it force, it takes its meaning in the context of actual resistance and actual struggle. And that's the key to what we have to do. And I'll leave that there.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is such a rich conversation, and I know there's much, much more to say. We do have to move on so we can get you all on your way at 9:15 as promised. We do want to share a few things that are coming up, part of how folks can get engaged and stay engaged in this work of organizing and movement building and engaging in this struggle that really can then create the conditions for all of us to be deepening and living out these values. So I'm going to show just a few slides about some things that are happening and coming up that we would love for you all to be involved in. The first is a petition that the New York State Poor People's Campaign and the Labor Religion Coalition and the Kairos Center launched last week. This is particularly for those of you who are in New York State. We are facing a exciting opportunity in a bunch of ways. The state a couple of years ago made a commitment to cut child poverty in half by 2032. We think this is a significant goal, although we know that we can actually end child poverty. But this is an important step forward. A commission created under that law is just now putting their recommendations together, or rather releasing those recommendations. And we know that it's going to take a lot of organizing to ensure that the governor and the legislature actually follow through on this commitment and implement these policies that we know are going to actually make New York reach this goal. So please, if you have not yet, sign on to that petition. Please share it widely. We're also accepting both individual sign-ons and organizational, congregational sign-ons. And we will keep you posted about an event to deliver the petition to the governor in Albany. It's looking like Sunday afternoon, December 22nd. We'll have more information to share about that soon. Something else that is coming up in the next few weeks, particularly on Long Island, is this Long Island Jobs with Justice Conference, Repairs of the Breach. I'm going to be putting the links in the chat to all of these things in just a second, but this is going to be a full day with some great speakers and workshops, and hope folks, especially who are in the vicinity of Long Island, will make an effort to be there for that. And last but not least, there's another conference coming up, a virtual conference, January 12th through 14th. It's going to be 3 evenings in a row. It is a partnership between the Kairos Center and Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice, Building Moral Leadership to Confront White Christian Nationalism. And we're going to continue to dive into these issues and hear some from some important thinkers and have some conversations about movement building as well. So please mark your calendars and check that out as well. And I am multitasking just a little bit here, but I'm gonna be putting these links into the chat right now for all of these things. And if you were on at the beginning, you saw our little technical difficulties where we had a video to share. And I am going to put it in the chat. We were going to play a little bit tongue-in-cheek a recording to begin of Onward Christian Soldiers. So that is a link that I just put in. And then we were going to close with a hymn that kind of expresses the other side, right? The other expression of Christian values of bringing folks together. And so I encourage you to check those out and look at them in kind of juxtaposition with one another. But I'm gonna take a little facilitator privilege, and I feel like it may be more appropriate and to the moment to get ourselves ready for the struggle ahead, to share a recent production from our New York State PPC media team and arts and culture team, which I will also share the link in the chat so folks can view it. We'll see if this works, and that will close us out. Sound working?
I don't have to tell you guys that today we're dealing with a big problem. And to solve a big problem, you need a big solution. And when you're dealing with a social problem, you need to build a social movement. And to me, what this is all about is us wielding a very powerful weapon of culture and art to build such a movement.
We are.
As offspring of immortals, ancestors open portals, path balanced as we hold you. We know you have led us, the system has bled us. Suppression never lets a reason to. We have to get up and stand up for our rights, and stand up for your rights, and stand up for our rights, and stand up for your rights.
We are the children of the ones who did not die. We are the children of the people who can fly, and we are the children of the ones who persevere. We are fearless, we are strong, and we're ready to carry on. We are fearless, we are strong, and we're ready to carry on. I say 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 we're ready to carry on.
Thank you so much, folks, for hanging out with us tonight. And thank you for being part of this struggle. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and we need to hang together and carry on and hang on